Folks, Brienne of Tarth is a hero's hero. She's a character I always bring up when people wrongly accuse A Song of Ice and Fire of being nihilistic or cynical or amoral, without hope, forlorn, because, of course, Brienne is one of those unambiguously good characters who stubbornly persists in trying to do the right thing pretty much all of the time, no matter what. Whether it's defending the innocent children and teenage girls of the Inn at the Crossroads from the predations of 7 of the absolute nastiest pieces of work in all of Westeros, or even slightly lower profile, yet still honorable deeds like stopping to bury the dead along the River of Trident when she really didn't have time to. She must know the Grateful Dead folklore, which is good. That's probably also why she made Shagwell the Fool bury poor old Nimble Dick beneath the weirwood tree. And then last but not least, Brienne is also out there making her dad proud. Selwyn of Tarth, the Evenstar, proud father of Lady Sir Brienne of Tarth. So yes, Brienne is heroic first and foremost because of her courage, integrity, honor, valor, and stubbornness. But it's also more than that because Brienne is a hero with a hero's sword, Oathkeeper. This is Foamkeeper. It doesn't hold up quite as well as Valyrian steel. However, it makes the point, which is that Brienne is a hero with a magic sword, and it's a red sword, which, checks notes, is kind of a thing in this story. And thanks for watching the Dawn and Lightbringer and Last Hero videos. And not only is Brienne a hero with a magic sword, she's also walking in the footsteps of another hero with a magic sword, and that would be Sir Galladon of Morne and his dread blade, the Just Maid. So yes, Galladon of Morne, it's your moment. And by the way, Galladon is also the name of Brienne's younger brother, who died in childhood. So it's extra meaningful to her, and Galladon is Brienne's hero, and in fact, seems to be the local hero of the Isle of Tarth. His story is pretty incredible, and it's definitely written to be part of Brienne's backstory to help set up Brienne's use of her magic sword. And in fact, the symbolism of the Galladon legend ties Brienne's story into the sort of greater A Song of Ice and Fire magic sword monomyth, which is, of course, all that Dawn and Lightbringer Last Hero stuff that we've been talking about. So yes, I've backdoored another magic sword video, but this one will be different. This one's about Brienne, and Brienne is cool. Even cooler is the fact that the Galladon legend helps us make some predictions about Brienne's endgame. So stay tuned to the end of the video, and I'll have 3 specific Winds of Winter, A Dream of Spring endgame predictions for Brienne. Now, most incredibly, and this is actually the initial reason that I made this video, the Galladon legend and the rest of what we know about the early days of the Isle of Tarth kind of make it seem like they are connected to the Daynes of Starfall and their mysterious origins with the Great Empire of the Dawn. That's right. I've also backdoored another Great Empire of the Dawn theory. It's what we do here. But reserve judgment, watch the video first, then roast me in the comments if you think I'm reaching for the stars. Nah, for real. It's legit. So do me the favor of clicking that like button, clicking the subscribe button, all the buttons. Check out our merch store. We got some t-shirts, and let's get this video started. Alright, so in A Feast for Crows, Brienne and Nimbledick and Pod Payne are meandering out on Cracklaw Point, and Nimbledick is doing his Nimbledick thing and talking about the exploits of Sir Clarence Crabbe, who else? And Brienne is saying that she had never heard of Clarence Crabbe, which Nimbledick can scarcely believe. And she says, why would I lie? Every place has its local heroes. Where I come from, the singers sing of Sir Galladon of Morne, the perfect knight. Sir Galahoo of what? Never heard of him. Why was he so bloody perfect? And that's probably all the Nimbledick we'll get today, so I had to get just a little bit, just a tip in there. And then Brienne gives us the legend proper, which goes like this. Sir Galladon was a champion of such valor that the maiden herself lost her heart to him. She gave him an enchanted sword as a token of her love. The Just Maid it was called. No common sword could check her, nor any shield withstand her kiss. Sir Galladon bore the Just Maid proudly, but only thrice did he unsheathe her. He would not use the maid against a mortal man, for she was so potent as to make any fight unfair. Nimbledick thinks that's hilarious and says perfect knight hats, perfect fool, sounds like. And he asks what's the point of having a magic sword if you don't bloody well use it, which again is setting up the moment at the end of Cracklaw Point when Brienne will finally decide to use Oathkeeper against Shagwell the Fool, the rest of the bloody mummers. So Brienne responds by saying, honor. The point is honor. That makes Nimbledick laugh. He's a utilitarian and he says, yeah, well, Clarence Crabbe would have wiped his hairy ass with your perfect knight, and his head would be added to the other heads down at the Whispers, and it'd be sitting there saying, I should have used the magic sword. And Brienne says, well, against a hero as great as Sir Clarence Crabbe, maybe he would have used the Just Maid, because after all, he did use the Just Maid to slay a dragon once. So that's what we know about Galladon of Morne. And essentially, as you can see, he is an embodiment of the knightly virtues. That's a huge theme in A Song of Ice and Fire, especially with characters like Brienne, Jaime Lannister, Dunk, aka Sir Duncan the Tall, who is Brienne's ancestor, Sandor Clegane, who is probably also a descendant of Dunk, like Brienne, and of course Sir Barristan Selmy. All these characters are wrestling with honor and what it means to keep your oaths and, all that kind of stuff. And accordingly, Galladon's name is taken from Galahad.
The Tale of Sir Galahad.
Sir Galahad, a knight of King Arthur's Round Table. Galahad is well known as being the most virtuous and pure of Arthur's knights. And in fact, his character was essentially created to embody perfection, purity, nobility, chivalry, honor, etc. The point is honor when it comes to Galahad. And if you remember in Monty Python in the Holy Grail, Galahad is the one who goes to Castle Anthrax, full of the scantily clad women, but can't be tempted. Until the very end, when he wants to go back in and face the peril. Maybe just a little bit of peril.
We were in the nick of time. You were in great peril.
I don't think I was.
Yes, you were. You were in terrible peril.
Look, let me go back in there and face the peril.
No, it's too perilous.
In any case, Galahad, the perfect knight, Galladon of Morne, the perfect knight, and Brienne striving to, uphold the knightly values embodied by these sorts of heroes. Now, Sir Galahad, he goes on a Grail quest, and he's one of the people that successfully finds the Holy Grail. And this, I think, translates into A Song of Ice and Fire, with Brienne going on a quest to find Sansa Stark. And of course, one of the sort of folkloric ideas about the Holy Grail is that it's a magical bloodline. So don't go too in the weeds with that. It's a loose parallel, but yeah. Brienne is going on a quest for something special, just like Galahad.
You are the keepers of the Holy Grail?
The what?
The Grail. It is here.
Now, we'll get into the House Dayne stuff in a few minutes, but I do just want to point out that the fact that Galladon is drawn from Galahad and Arthurian mythology, that this is a clue to get us to think about Arthur Dayne and his sword Excalibur. Dawn, which is of course Arthurian mythology. And interestingly, Galahad actually repeats a version of the sword in the stone myth theme, which we first see with Arthur. So, like Arthur, Galahad is able to pull a special sword from the stone because he is so damn noble and pure. So let's talk about the Just Maid, Galladon's magic sword. There's really just a ton of wordplay here, beginning with the idea that Brienne herself is the Just Maid. She's the Maid of Tarth, and she is very just. And Brienne's sword, Oathkeeper, is one half of Ned's ice, which some of us like to call just ice, because Ned is serving up the king's justice when he executes people with ice, which is a sword he only uses to do justice. And that's what they call it, justice. When Jon goes to watch the execution at the beginning of Game of Thrones, it says Jon was an old hand at justice, meaning he's seen Ned do this before. So yeah, Brienne has one half of ice, just ice, and she attempts to wield it justly, just as Galladon would only unsheathe the Just Maid against a magical foe. And then just to talk about Brienne and her family for a minute, I mentioned that Galladon, her younger brother, drowned when he was young, and she also had two other siblings die in the cradle, Alysanne and Quentyn. So Brienne is the only child of Selwyn of Tarth, the Evenstar, to survive to adulthood. And that's one reason that Brienne is so fixated on honor and making her family proud, making her house proud. And a really cool detail that gives us some insight into Brienne's relationship with her dad is the fact that her dad let her train martially since she was young. The Master-at-Arms at House Tarth has been training her, and you can compare that to Lyanna Stark, who is not allowed to train by Rickard Stark. In fact, it's her older brother Brandon, and then later also Ned and Benjen, that sort of trained Lyanna at swordplay in secret. But not Brienne, she's trained officially since a young age, so that's really cool. Her dad has her back with doing whatever she's doing. Now, as we know, Brienne is descended from Sir Duncan. That's been confirmed by George. And in fact, Brienne finds Dunk's old shield hanging in the shield hall at Tarth, which means that some future Dunk and Egg story, which I'm sure George will have time to write, will take Dunk and Egg through Tarth, apparently. But it's more than that, of course. Brienne joins Renly's Rainbow Guard, which is his King's Guard, just as Dunk joins Egg's King's Guard. Just as Dunk has Egg, initially the short sidekick, Brienne has Pod Payne, of course, very similar. And you'll even notice some parallels between Pod and Egg. So Pod, named after a seed pod, which is similar to an egg. And the sigil of House Payne Dayne has gold coins on it, and gold coins are dragons. And then we've got the colors of the Valyrians themselves, with the white and silver for the hair and the purple for the eyes. So, some cool parallels there. And you could also see a parallel in the death of Renly, who kind of dies in Brienne's arms, and the death of Baelor Breakspear, who essentially dies in Dunk's arms. These are both tragic deaths of young men who could have been great kings. I'd say Baelor's slightly more promising than Renly, but they're both pretty promising as kings, and beloved of Dunk and Brienne. So now, even though Galladon's name is clearly drawn from Galahad, the change from Alahad to Aladon could be inspired by the name Aladdin, or Aladdin. And why do I say that? Well, Aladdin, it turns out, is translated as nobility of faith. And Galladon of Morne was specifically so noble that he pleased the maiden herself of the faith of the seven. Aladdin has a magic artifact associated with the number 3, the lamp, which grants 3 wishes. And Galladon of Morne has the sword he only uses 3 times. Brienne's magic artifact is Oathkeeper, and she has sort of a messed up alt genie scene with Lady Stoneheart when she is brought to Lady Stoneheart's cave. And Stoneheart is doing the opposite of granting wishes. She's got the magic item, the sword. So it's sort of a messed up parallel. And if you think about it, Dunk's story is actually more like Aladdin's story in that he comes from the streets, comes from nothing, rises to great heights, and likes to make out with princesses. And yes, I'm calling Rohan Weber a princess. I hope no one will object. And at the risk of reaching a little too far, I'll just point out that the magic lamp is a lamp, and the magic sword has parallels to Lightbringer. Okay, so Galladon of Morne, who is he? Well, if you haven't heard me say this before, Galladon of Morne, dawn, sort of the morning. Yeah, it's very similar. And then we've got Starfall, home of the Danes, and Evenfall Hall, home of the Tarths. And Tarth is their last name. That's her name, Brienne Tarth. Sounds a little odd, but technically that's what it is. So Evenfall Hall and Starfall, and of course the Lord of Tarth is called the Even Star. So it's really Even Starfall Hall, which has Starfall in it. And that's because this is all Venus symbolism, of course. Even though Venus is a planet, it appears in the sky as the brightest star in the sky, and every 200 some odd days it switches positions relative to Earth between rising just before the sun does, when it's called the morning star, and rising as the first star of evening as the sun is setting, in which case it is called the even star. And so, both House Dayne and House Tarth are reflecting that morning star, even star, Venus dichotomy. The original home of the Tarths is called Morne, but now they live in Evenfall Hall, and the title of their lord is Evenstar. And then of course with the Danes, they have the sword of the morning and the idea of dawn, but then also Darkstar, who is of the night, and Vorian Dane, the sword of the evening. And then as an extra morning star clue, right before Brienne tells the story of Galladon of Morne, Old Nimble Dick mentions Lord Lucifer Hardy, who was a great one, as all men know. And that's all we know about Lord Lucifer. He was a great one, but yeah, it's just a clue to think about dawn when we talk about Galladon of Morne. And yes, I've got my selenite knife prop, all the knife props today, because you need something to wave around. And Oathkeeper's kind of big. I put it back on the floor there. So then we have the sigil of House Tarth, which I've tried my best to recreate with the set here. As you can see, it is based on the idea of sunrise and sunset, with the moon and the sun, the nice color combination of rose and blue, and of course this is just morning star and even star stuff. Now getting into the mythology a little bit, the Just Maid seems to be a star sword just like Dawn, because it is given to Galladon by the maiden herself, and each one of the 7, the maiden is one of the gods of the 7, each one of the 7 is associated with one of the 7 celestial wanderers, which is an ancient concept referring to the 5 planets visible from Earth and the sun and moon. Those are called the celestial wanderers because they do not move in sync with the rest of the stars, with the turning backdrop of the heavens. So the maiden who gave Galladon the sword, the Just Maid, she is most likely either associated with the moon or with Venus. Definitely seems like it would be one of those two. Venus could make sense because of the Aphrodite celestial maiden implications, and Brienne is also called the Beauty, which is an Aphrodite thing, which we'll talk about in a moment. But there's also a constellation in A Song of Ice and Fire called the Moon Maid, so maybe the maiden is associated with the moon. Now, I do want to tell you that the place where Martin got the name the Just Maid is Virgo, one of the zodiacal constellations, because Virgo appears to be holding aloft the scales of Libra, and this led to a concept of the Just Maiden, which we also know as Blind Lady Justice. So here, the concept of virginity of the maiden is translated into purity and truth in general. And Virgo holding up Libra is also the idea behind the Greek myth of the goddess Astrea, who is associated with divine justice. So all that is to say, the maiden herself, she's a star of some kind, or a moon, one or the other. So Galladon's magic sword is implied as either coming from the moon or the stars, either of which works, because there were moon meteors that were probably made into magic swords, and Dawn was made from a meteor, according to canon. So yeah, the Just Maid would seem to be a star sword. And then another point of comparison to Dawn is the idea of being worthy. Only a knight who is worthy can carry Dawn. It's not just whoever is the Lord of House Dayne. We don't know what the criteria is, but there is some criteria for nominating somebody as being worthy of carrying Dawn and being named Sword of the Morning. And that's similar to Galladon, who was given the Just Maid because of his extreme valor and honor. Now, when Brienne is given Oathkeeper by Jaime, there's a very cool inversion of the idea of the maiden herself giving the Just Maid to Galladon of Morne, because Jaime is described as the warrior himself, and he's giving the sword to Brienne, Maid of Tarth. So this time it's the warrior giving the sword to the maiden instead of vice versa. And there's definitely nothing sexual going on here at all. There never is with swords and maidens and stuff. And definitely never with Brienne and Jaime. That's all very platonic and yeah, no, who are we kidding? And then finally, just as the Just Maid sort of plays up the theme of Galladon being just and noble, Brienne's sword is called Oathkeeper. So yeah, it's thematic. Themes are for 8th grade book reports and A Song of Ice and Fire, as it turns out. Still can't believe they said that. I mean, seriously, come here, come closer. What kind of writer scoffs at the idea of themes?
No. Oh, no. Bad.
Anyway, as I mentioned, Brienne's nickname, Brienne the Beauty, is a reference to Aphrodite and thus to Venus, because Aphrodite is the Greek name for the Roman goddess Venus. So this essentially is just a sneaky way for George to apply Lightbringer symbolism that doesn't have to do with swords. You know, for the ladies. And we see this with Daenerys too. She's called the most beautiful woman in the world, and she wants to dress in starlight and sea foam, which are specific call-outs to Aphrodite. And just in case I wasn't clear, Lucifer is the Latin word for the planet Venus. So the goddess is Aphrodite associated with the planet, but the planet itself they called Lucifer, at least when it was in the morning star position. Lucifer is translated as Lightbringer, and so that's how you get Aphrodite and Venus, leading to Lightbringer. And of course, it's not just Brienne's nickname of the beauty that ties her to Venus and Aphrodite and Lightbringer, but also the fact that she has a red sword. And I'm sorry for my red light having just turned off that ran out of batteries, and I'm not sure how long it's been off, but it's back on now so that we can talk about Brienne's red sword, which ties her to Azor Ahai and Lightbringer again. So that's interesting. Two very different lines of symbolism that lead us back to Lightbringer and Venus. This is something we'll come back to in the predictions section, so put a pin in that. And then if we look at the rest of the Galladon myth, we might notice that the maiden herself sounds a bit like Nissa. She lost her heart to Galladon and then gave him a magic sword. And of course, Azor Ahai tempered Lightbringer in the heart of Nissa, and then she gave up the magic sword. And she lost her heart, presumably in the process. I don't think you survived that. Now, Oathkeeper's companion, also dyed red, is Widow's Wail. And I believe that name, Widow's Wail, is inspired by Nissa's cry of agony and ecstasy, which, checks notes, left a crack across the face of the moon. And that's pretty cool. It just doubles up the idea of Brienne carrying a magic sword and the maiden herself losing her heart like Nissa to give Galladon his magic sword. Then we have Jaime's dream of being under Casterly Rock with Brienne, where they both have flaming swords. And they both have flaming swords. Brienne has a flaming sword in the dream, so that's more Lightbringer stuff. And then flipping back to the Galladon legend, we have more Lightbringer stuff, because Galladon only uses his sword 3 times, and Azor Ahai takes 3 attempts to forge the sword. Galladon is supposedly a dragon slayer, and Azor Ahai, all signs indicate, was a dragon rider. So that's different, obviously, but both legends are tied to dragons. And then when we think about the Dragon Slayer legends of Westeros, there are ties back to Galladon. So one of those dragon slayers is Serwyn of the Mirror Shield, and Serwyn is very close to the name Selwyn, as in Selwyn of Tarth, the Even Star, who named his son Galladon. Then we have Davos Dragon Slayer, no idea what house he comes from, but he has the same first name as Sir Davos Dayne, Lord of Starfall and Sword of the Morning. And then we have Dunk, Brienne's ancestor. He watches a puppet show in the Hedge Knight, which involves a dragon slayer. And then he goes and slays the dragon Aerion by defeating him in single combat. And not only that, Daron the Drunkard had a dream of Dunk essentially being under a dead dragon, which fell on top of him. And that turned out to be a prophecy of Baelor Breakspear's tragic death on behalf of Dunk. So that dream essentially is Dunk slaying the dragon of Baelor Breakspear. So I honestly don't know where all that dragon slaying is going, but it does seem to be a thing running in Brienne's story and Galladon's story and perhaps even the original story of the Daynes. And I went into this more in the Origins of Old Town video, but the idea is that some of the people from the Great Empire of the Dawn may have come to Westeros and been loyal to the Westerosi and resisted the evil Dragon Lord Bloodstone Emperor. There are some hints in that direction, so Hightowers and Daynes might be Amethyst Empress loyalists, if you will, because there are also stories of dragon slaying at Old Town on the Fewstone Fortress. So again, check out Origins of Old Town. But yeah, Galladon of Morne seems to be tied into this idea of dragon slaying. Alright, so just as Galladon of Morne sounds like Dawn, Sword of the Morning, and just as the sword Dawn seems like it might have come from the Great Empire of the Dawn, we can't help notice that just beyond the Shadowlands east of Ashai are the Mountains of the Morne, and the oldest city on the Isle of Tarth is called Morne. Now, Tarth is supposedly a first man name, however, one of the 5 names for Azor Ahai from the east is Yin Tar. So maybe that's tied to Tarth. And the place that Martin got that is the prefixes of the Lords of Numenor. Tar Miriel, Tar Palantir, etc. Then we have Lord Edwin Tarth, the Even Star. He married the daughter of Lord Durin the Fair Durrandon, and he is the oldest member of House Tarth that we have. And his name Edwin could be in the Elric name variant family, which is something we talked about in the last hero video. Now, stepping away from the wordplay for a second and just talking about what the Maesters tell us about Tarth. They say that the Tarths claim that the title Even Star goes back to, quote, the dawn of days. And since they're a first man house, that essentially means the dawn age or the age of heroes. Now, Morne's ruins are old and abandoned, and the Maesters do think that it was at least rebuilt by the Andals, because the Andals did come with better castle technology, seemingly, and they did tend to rebuild a lot of the places where they settled and intermarried. However, it's pretty easy to imagine a scenario where the original Morne was founded by the First Men, and it was simply rebuilt later by the Andals. And then eventually they abandoned it altogether and moved over to the side of the island with the nicer weather and built Evenfall Hall. And then finally, another covert Great Empire of the Dawn clue is the fact that those flaming swords that Brienne and Jaime have, well, they burn with a pale light. And the Gemstone Emperors in Daenerys' dream, which seem to be the Gemstone Emperors from the Great Empire of the Dawn, well, they have swords that burn with pale fire. So yeah, Jaime and Brienne's dream swords, they burn with silvery blue flame and give off pale light, and that's pretty close to the Great Empire of the Dawn swords. So when you put all that together, the picture that emerges is that, you know, the first Tarths may essentially be connected to the founding of House Dayne. They may almost be like a cadet branch of House Dayne, or perhaps just some allied Great Empire of the Dawn immigrant. Because as I mentioned earlier, it does seem like the first Hightowers and Daynes came to Westeros together. So I'm essentially proposing that the first Tarths were part of that same migration. That's why they named their castle Morne and took up the name Evenstar, and that's why they seem to have some sort of garbled legend about some sort of star sword hero wielding dawn, or maybe his name's Galladon. He was the finest sword in Morne, or maybe he was the sword of the morning, and maybe he got his sword from a magic woman who lost her heart to him, or maybe he forged the sword in her heart, and that made it magic. It's hard to say, but what we can say is that the Galladon myth is essentially a garbled version of Lightbringer and Dawn mythology. So it certainly seems like the story made it over to Tarth, and stories usually go with people. So Tarth, called the Sapphire Isle, was there a Sapphire Emperor? Is that a lost dynasty of the Great Empire of the Dawn? Probably not. There was a Topaz Emperor, so maybe Topaz became Sapphire. But if anything, the gemstone may just be a clue to think about gemstones and the gemstone emperors. Hey guys, video editor Dave checking in with something I forgot to address. And how's it going, by the way? Are you enjoying the video? So as you can see on the screen in this World of Ice and Fire passage about Morne, the observant Maester Hubert points out that, you know, the maiden herself is part of the Andal religion of the Faith of the Seven. And that potentially cuts against the idea that Galladon's story is from the Age of Heroes or the Dawn Age. I, however, would posit that the original Star Maiden, Nissa, who's associated with the moon and potentially falling stars, well, her legend would have come over to Morne and the Isle of Tarth with the first Tarths many centuries and eons before the Andals ever arrived. And then as the original Tarths intermarry with Andals over time, as all the First Men houses did, perhaps this old legend about Nissa, which probably would have mutated already by that time, changed shape a little bit to become the maiden herself, who is a celestial maiden associated with either the moon or Venus, like we were saying. Alright, I'm here in King of Winter pose to give Winds of Winter predictions. Just call me Ogier the Dave. And I hope you were as pleased as I was to find out that The Simpsons did it regarding Ogier the Dane. That flipped my wig almost as much as finding the inspiration for the name Eldric's Shadow Chaser in an ABBA song. That's right, it all makes sense. And don't go look up the intro for Thundar the Barbarian, whatever you do. Whatever you do. All right, so Winds of Winter predictions. Let's do the easiest one first. Brienne will, by the end of the story, be named Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. This would parallel Dunk, who became Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. And in this way, Brienne can restore honor to the Kingsguard, which is sorely needed, sorely needed. And there's really no one better for the job than Brienne, the Just Maid herself. And what's really cool about this is that Brienne would actually be finishing what Jaime started, because he's starting to have this idea that maybe he should do the right thing and stuff, or something. So yeah, by the end of the story, maybe it will be Brienne as Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, and that would establish this interesting line of continuity between Sir Arthur Dayne, who knighted Jaime, to Jaime, and then to Brienne. Because if Jaime has any honor that he's trying to impose on the Kingsguard, it kind of comes from the inspiration of Arthur Dayne. So that's kind of cool with the Dane, Dawn, Galladon connections. Brienne, inspired by Galladon of Morne, will be restoring honor to the Kingsguard. So now moving from easy to intermediate level, Brienne will be one of the new last hero companions. So you don't give someone a Valyrian steel sword for nothing. Those things are good for killing others, I hear. And Brienne is obviously heroic, as we've established. Galahad was a knight of the Round Table, King Arthur's Round Table, and accordingly, I believe that Brienne will be a member of Jon's new last hero dozen, who will either go north beyond the wall or just fight the others at the wall. Brienne's got the right weapon for it, and she's a great warrior. She's tough, she's durable, very durable, she's stubborn, and we know she'll never abandon her post. So yeah, similar to on the show, we saw Jaime and Brienne fighting the others at Winterfell. I do think we'll see Brienne and perhaps also Jaime fighting the others in the north at some point. Jaime's dream does seem to suggest that. They both got flaming swords, and the Kingsguard are described in very otherish terms, as we discussed in the last video. They're trailing mist, they make no sound, and Brienne is ready to take them on. Now, the first Tarth that we hear about in the story is actually a Night's Watchman. His name is Sir Endru Tarth, and he unfortunately dies at the Bridge of Skulls fighting the Weeper, but he is a Night's Watchman of the Shadow Tower. So perhaps Brienne's dream of fighting Shadow Kingsguard, who seem like others, does foreshadow her following in the footsteps of Endru Tarth of the Shadow Tower and fighting the others. Now, if Tarth was a part of this great Empire of the Dawn migration of the Danes and High Towers, then it would make even more sense for Brienne to fight alongside the new last hero, who I think is Jon Snow, or you might say Jon and Daenerys. Because, of course, the last hero and Dawn and the Sword of the Morning and all that stuff seems to be wrapped up in fighting against the others and the Long Night. And then little bonus prediction, kind of adding on to this one, there is an outside chance that Brienne could come out of Stoneheart's cave of Firewhite. Perhaps she'll be killed in some sort of duel there, and Stoneheart's flame of life will pass to her somehow. And the main reason I mention that is because Firewhites and the last hero fighting the others seems to be a thing. Check out the Melisandre's Secrets series. And finally, speaking of Stoneheart, that brings us to our master level Winds of Winter predictions, I guess. I don't know. I started the metaphor earlier. Doesn't make sense anymore. This is the most complicated one anyway. As I mentioned, Sir Galahad did his own sword in the stone thing, and Brienne is caught up in the machinations of Lady Stoneheart. And Lady Stoneheart has effectively trapped Brienne and forced Brienne into luring Jaime back into the cave. And without getting into the detailed predictions of all of what could go on there, it does seem possible that at some point Jaime and Brienne could be forced to fight one another. They already had a good fight in the river, of course, which is a chapter I want to reread soon. And so yeah, what if they're made to fight against each other, but then of course they don't really want to kill each other, so they end up fighting their way out of the cave? And what if Brienne puts her sword into the heart of Lady Stoneheart? When she pulls it out, it might take fire. It would absorb Stoneheart's flame of life. And then you'd have the flaming sword. They'd be down in the cave, just like Jaime and Brienne were in Jaime's dream, where they had flaming swords in the cave under Casterly Rock. So yeah, that could be foreshadowing Brienne having a flaming sword in the cave. And the best way to light Oathkeeper on fire down there, yeah, into the Stoneheart. So not only would this mimic the sword in the stone myth of Galahad and Arthur, it would also, of course, mimic Azor Ahai and Nissa Nissa and the forging of Lightbringer, tempering of Lightbringer in Nissa Nissa's heart. So let me know what you think the likelihood is of this last one. I think it's pretty cool. I mean, it's pretty macabre, but Stoneheart does have to die somehow. And if it's not Arya coming back to do it, then I think this could make a lot of sense. And there's even a chance Arya could be back by the time this all goes down, because I do think Stoneheart will first send out Jaime to do some sort of deception and help her retake Riverrun, which is her real goal. Remember, family, duty, honor. The phrase holding Riverrun is kind of an abomination. So yeah, what I'd expect is that Brienne is held hostage in the cave. Jaime is sent out to open the gates of Riverrun, which he will do because he loves Brienne. So then when he comes back to Stoneheart's cave, that could be when the sword fight goes down, and by then Arya could even be back. And then finally, just to close this out, I will point out that if Brienne is to kill Lady Stoneheart with her magic sword, this could be Brienne's version of the dragon slaying of Galladon. Dragons are monsters that live in caves, and I'm sorry, but Lady Stoneheart is a monster at this point. And she's basically killing lots of people in the local area, just like a dragon does. So yeah, maybe that's where the dragon slaying arc is going for Brienne. But let me know in the comments, as I always say. Again, thanks for watching. Love making these videos. Couldn't do it without you watching them. So I do appreciate it. And if you want to support the program further, you can check out our Patreon linked below, where we've got access to our gallery of commissioned art, high-res downloads. We're giving away t-shirts every month, access to our Discord, and a few other things. So I've been David Lightbringer. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.